Bernadette Russell. Welcome to my podcast, How to Be Hopeful, a podcast all about hope, how to find it, especially if you've lost it, and how to keep hold of it once you've found it. I'm very happy this week in episode 15 to be speaking to the actor Natasha Magigi. Now, any of you who have been following any of the fallout of the COVID pandemic will know that theatre and performing arts is one of the industries that's been hit very heavily for obvious reasons. All live performances have been closed, just about to reopen actually, but as theatres employs mostly freelancers, and many of my friends that work in the industry are freelancers, there's been lots of hardship, as well as lots of amazing reinvention, including shows happening on Zoom and on other platforms. So I was really excited to speak to Natasha about this, given that she's a freelance actor. She's amazing and really super accomplished. But I just wondered how she's managed to maintain hope for herself during these difficult times, and what it was like trying to fulfill her dream of becoming an actor. So here she is. So, hello Natasha.
Hi Bernadette.
May I ask you, I don't actually know how to pronounce your surname. I realised that earlier. Could you say it for me?
Magigi.
Magigi!
Yeah, it's so much easier than it looks like it's good. I mean, people second guess my name because they're like, well, it couldn't be a hard G, could it? I'm like, it's so much easier than you're making it.
Yeah, it's I get name tension quite a lot, and I think it's always better to ask than to mangle it. And I'm sure that you experience many comedic and annoying mispronunciations having Magigi.
People think I'm fancier than I am. I think that's what it is. People often go for like the French. It must be French. Magigi. That's what must be her name.
That's what I thought. I thought it's French, so it's like Magigi, which you know,
which is fine in its own right. But you know, I'm not as fancy as that.
I don't know about that. You're looking pretty fancy. I should say that you're wearing an extremely glamorous, I'm going to say gown.
Well, it's a happy coat, which is like a quilted, like half-length kimono, like a kimono jacket, if you like.
Lovely.
A friend sent me from Japan.
It's absolutely extraordinary. It is a coat of many colours.
Yeah, and it's reversible, so I've got a winter side as well.
Oh, she's very well prepared. Anyway, it's lovely. I'm really pleased to speak with you and see your lovely smiling face. I just wondered, just before we dig in, Natasha Magigi, could we because obviously I'm trying to talk about hope, or focus the podcast mainly on hope, and I wondered if there has been anything for you this week that's given you a hope, even a little twinkle.
Well, I was struggling. I was like, oh, something hopeful, please, something, anything. And then
fair enough. There are hard times for dreamers.
Not the easiest, but I have two things.
Amazing.
Yeah, one is it's small in the grand scheme of the world, but it's big for me. So I injured my knee on a job in November 2019, and this week I've been able to walk down the stairs normally.
No, that's fantastic.
That's really good, and I can kneel on all fours. So I'm like, yay! Then my cousin called me at the beginning of the week, and I hadn't realised it was a hopeful thing until yesterday. It turns out my cousin has written a children's book.
Oh, wow.
And I received the book yesterday from her, and it's this glorious, lovely children's book called The Mysterious Melody, by, I should say her name, by my cousin Portia Mushambi, but her writing name is SPK Mushambi.
Okay.
And a story about two twins who keep being woken up at 5 a.m. by this song that they're hearing. And then they go and investigate what this melody is. And it turns out to be this song that's played by this like mystical, magical grandma on a Zimbabwean instrument called the mbari, which is like a thumb piano, and it's a story about them discovering what that instrument is and how to play it and what it means for them, and linking them back to their roots, because they've grown up in London, but it links them back to their Zimbabwean heritage. It's a lovely book, and it's really well illustrated as well.
I'll make sure that I put a link to that in the copy of the podcast then, that book, which I will also buy, because it sounds absolutely beautiful. I probably love children's books best, not secretly. Brilliant. Okay, well, they're two great things. And actually, sometimes I know what you mean. Some weeks it's like, oh, what is there? But actually, the process of actively looking's quite enjoyable, because there is always something. And also, like you just said about your knee, that isn't a small thing, actually, Tash, is it? It's pretty major if you've had an injury to be able to walk up and down the stairs and wriggle around on all fours if you fancy it. So, you know, let's celebrate the things we've got, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to skipping.
I'd like to see you skip down the high street. Oh, so now this might take some time, because you're a woman of many accomplishments. But I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit, for those people that don't know you that are listening, about what you do, Tash.
I am an actor. It's taken me a long time to actually say that. I used to say all sorts of things. I'm a receptionist. I'm a bar. You know.
Okay, why was that? Before you go, what?
I think because the life of an actor is not the most straightforward, and it felt for me anyway, when I spent the majority of my working life working in offices and in shops, or doing customer service, or doing role play, as opposed to actually performing, that it was harder to say I was an actor without like the proofs. And I know that seems silly, because obviously you are always the thing you are, but it's a really hard job to define yourself.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. But I'm really pleased that you're saying that you are, and you're sort of owning that. But you hear it a lot, don't you? Especially, it's one of those industries that's kind of measured by a lot of people in very narrow ways. Like, you know, if you haven't got an Oscar, you're not an actor. If you haven't won the Booker Prize, you're not a writer. It's one of those things that you just have to get over yourself somehow, I think. Do you?
Yeah, I think so.
But yeah. Anyway, I interrupted you. You are an actor, and you've done amazing things, so let's hear about that.
Well, like you, I've worked a lot with a Lewisham-based company called Teatro Vivo, and I'm now an associate artist, which is exciting, which means I get a little bit more choice in the kind of work that the company's producing as a whole, which is really interesting. I have done a lot of Shakespeare, both with that company and with the Globe and the RSC. I've worked with like regional theatres like the Curve and the Playhouse, which was the former West Yorkshire Playhouse. I've toured the country. I've done the whole country: England, Scotland, Wales, not Northern Ireland, but done the Republic.
Nice.
Which I know is not part of the country. I've done jobs across Europe and the rest of the world now, pretty much. I think there's 3 continents I haven't performed on.
So you've got to get them done, Tash.
Yeah, I've got to do Australasia, Africa and South America.
And Northern Ireland. Well, that's fantastic. Now, I was really excited to speak to you, because I know you've done loads of great things, and I think it's easy to forget inside the industry that actually outside the industry it's this sort of fairy tale job occupation that people might aspire to or wish they'd done, and I think everybody's individual journey is really different. But I think I've said this to you before, but I connect it with hope, because I think it's one of those dream jobs that people might hope to do but might not allow themselves to dare to try to. So I thought it'd be really interesting to talk to you about your successes. Did you, as a little baby Tash, did you always want to be an actress? Did it start from early days?
I mean, you could argue yes, because I was like part of a dance troupe when I was like 5, 6. And I was part of a carnival. So I used to do like calypso dancing when I was little. And then my mum suggested I do ballet when I got older to get me away from, going live and kicking. And my sister was doing it. But I put on the red leotard and I was like, this is not for me. No ballet for me. But then I did some tap and then fell into street dance, which I did until I was 18. And I went to Sylvia Young part-time. But it was more of a hobby than it was like a realised thing I wanted to do, because I started playing the violin when I was 8, and that moved me to the piano, and then street dance happened, and then I went into singing lessons because I could kind of sing, and then I was like, well, I'm in singing lessons, so I might as well do acting lessons, so I'll do that. But in my head, I always thought I'd end up being a doctor or a lawyer. Yeah, and then I saw a man injure himself in the bus, and I was like, I can't be a doctor. If I can't handle the sight of blood, doctoring is not for me. And then I was like, oh, well, then there's still law. And then I wanted to be like a graphic designer, an interior designer, and then a furniture designer. This is all around GCSE. And then at some point I realised that if I became an actor, I could do all of those things. And it was probably because my acting teacher at Sylvia Young, so I used to go on a Saturday, was like, have you thought about drama school? And I was like, no, I have not. And he was like, I think you should. And I guess that's really where it became a real thing.
That's such a lovely way of thinking about it as well. If I become an actor, I can be all of those things. It's so beautiful. And also, it's really lovely to hear that you had a teacher who said, have you? You should. Because we all need that teacher at some point, I think, don't we? Or that adult that's like, have you thought? You should. That's absolutely brilliant. Well, I love the list of aspirations, because mine was similarly long, I think. So then, slightly bigger, not so tiny Tash, went to drama school. And so how was that? How was your time at drama school?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I went to Rose Bruford, which is based in Sidcup. But my first year was in Deptford, so they used to have a campus on Creek Road, which is opposite where Laban is now. And I believe it's a bunch of courts called Rose Court in honour of Rose Bruford. And then in my second year, we moved to Sidcup. And I guess drama school is like a little bubble that you immerse yourself in the training, and you kind of spend all of your time with the same people. Learning about what you do and going through the processes of it and what it is, and then getting a taste of what the industry you're going to walk into may or may not be for you. Mm-hmm. I loved drama school and I hated drama school, but that's because, there were times when it wasn't as easy.
Yeah.
I thought it would be. And then you realise that you don't know as much as you think you know. Or it asks more of you than you expected.
Right. That sounds tough. I mean, I guess that's a lot of people's experience of further or higher education, but there's something about drama school that makes you look in a different kind of way, I think. Do you think that's fair?
I think it requires a lot of, I think, emotional maturity. Which is difficult when you go in when you're 18.
Yeah.
And it asks you to reflect on yourself and draw from your own experiences. And that's useful because that's what you'll end up doing. But learning how to do that is taxing, or can be taxing. And sometimes it can be amazing when you make that breakthrough and you're like, that's what you meant. I get that now. Right, I see. Okay. And I don't think drama school is like the be and end all. I think it's the beginning of a process. I don't think you come out of drama school like, this is who I am now. I understand acting.
Bit like
I
when you
think,
pass your driving test.
yeah, which I haven't.
No, I haven't either. So, but I kind of think it probably works as an analogy. I know from other people, like,
Yeah.
I learnt to drive once I passed my test, and then I was like,
Yeah, it's a very different thing. Like I'm constantly still learning. And I think what drama school gives you is a sort of foundation of technique that supports that learning. So, like, I know how my voice works, I know how my body works, I know how to break down text. So then you've got those things that you can always rely on to sort of be your bedrock. But then the other sort of things that come with experience, you can't learn in drama school, you learn on the job.
yeah, yeah.
And vice versa. Like, I think it's quite a symbiotic process. Everything goes in via osmosis.
Yeah. And I know that you've been, the Tash that I know has been very prolific and successful. You've done loads and loads of amazing things. But I also, I was an actress, so I can't, I know that it's a complicated journey often. So before we go back on that a little bit, because I think that's worth unpacking as well, is you mentioned, some amazing jobs like the RSC and the Globe, which is my favourite venue, actually, the Globe.
Mine too.
Yeah, it really is. Oh, it's very precious. I remember sitting opposite you once. Do you remember?
Yes. Watching Amelia.
We were, going, wow, miming to each other. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about, I'm sure this is difficult to choose, but if you could talk a little bit about one of your favourite acting roles and why that was your favourite.
It is difficult, isn't it?
It doesn't have to be the only one, because that would be impossible, I'm sure, but one that for whatever reason.
I guess I'm gonna go with my very first paid professional job, because that always is like theatre job. I should classify theatre job because it is always special. And it was at the Globe, and it was with it was Globe Education's first realised performance on the Globe stage as part of their playing Shakespeare. I guess canon would be fair to say now, because that's become a thing that they do. And I was 23, I think, give or take. And I was playing Hero in Much Ado. And it was so special because A, it was the Globe and I love the Globe. And B, it was a Shakespeare virgin, which is something I never thought I would be cast as. Like, it was never in my head to go for the Heroes and the Juliets and the Mirandas and all of those. And suddenly there was this company that was like, yeah, we'd like you to play Hero.
Could you explain the part for people that aren't familiar with
Much Ado? Much Ado, what's that play about? It's a love story. It's one of the comedies, and it centres around Benedict and Beatrice, who are a couple that have loads of banter, but can't admit that actually that banter lies in the fact that they have a thing for each other. And Hero is Beatrice's cousin, and she is has been set up to marry a guy called Claudio. And, it's all going very similarly well, but behind their backs there's a little bit of a plot set up by another character to kind of ruin the whole marriage. And she is confused for another woman and is accused of not being a virgin. And so Claudio's like, well, then I won't marry you because, Shakespeare. And then it's all resolved in the end. Happily ever.
Goodness. Love that, though. I love that. What, if you don't mind, if this isn't too personal, Tash, but why was it surprising for you to be cast as Hero? Because that makes me honestly, that kind of makes me a bit sad. It's a bit sad, isn't it, when we as women think, well, we're never going to get that thing. Or it's not just women, certain roles. What was it? Why were you surprised?
Because I have always been a fat child, and I'm now a fat adult. So I hadn't really seen fat women in sort of love story roles that weren't comic.
Yeah, right.
And the closest I'd get to that would be things like Ricky Lake in like Hairspray, or what was that one in the Wood? Babes in the Wood? Is that what it's called? I'm going to go with that. Or like Dawn French, but always in a comic sort of setting, as opposed to like a serious, realised love interest.
Yeah, it's that whole sort of object of desire thing, the narrow range of objects of desire, and the comedy thing I think is interesting, because you get that a lot, don't you? It's like, you can be different as long as we can laugh.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was a surprise to me that someone would want that to happen. It also happened with Teatro Vivo, where in the very first show that we did, which is called Doing What Lovers Do, which was a sort of retelling of Romeo and Juliet through the eyes of Rosalind and Paris, that Sophie Austin, who'd been the artistic director at the time and had formed the company, had asked me to play Juliet. And I had an actual argument with her where I was like, I'm not a Juliet, I'm a nurse. And she's like, you're 100% a Juliet. And I'm like, I'm really not. And we were arguing about two different things. I was arguing about body type, and she was arguing on personality type. And it never occurred to me that I would be cast based on my personality. And it's fair to say Sophie had known me for a long time, so she could cast me based on my personality because she knows that side of me, whereas other people will only see the bit of me that they meet for the first time.
I have to say, as an audience member as well, I'm not just saying this to be sort of grand, but when casting surprises you, especially in a text that's familiar to you, like Shakespeare often is, it's always a gift, because suddenly you look at it, suddenly you're fresh.
Yeah.
And actually, and it doesn't mean that you're thinking, ooh, that person's a bit short to play Romeo or whatever, but it just freshens your eye. So, but I'm really glad to hear that people in the establishment, I suppose, because I think of the Globe, as lovely, wonderful as it is, it's quite an establishment place, that there are people that are going, do you know what, let's just have the best person, let's be a bit more imaginative about casting, is actually really hopeful, isn't it?
Yeah, really hopeful. And it I guess it's set up the way I think about myself and what I do and audiences in a way that I hadn't expected. Because one of the things that was joyful about that job and why I chose it as my favourite is because I saw myself in the audience. I saw versions of myself in the audience. And the show was aimed at a youth audience, so they were probably between like 11 to 18, but the bulk would be around year 9, 13, 14. And suddenly thinking, well, if I didn't see myself when I was their age, how wonderful is it for them to see themselves at my age? But it took a while for me to process that that's actually what was happening in that moment.
Of course, and that is what's wonderful about live performance, is that exchange, I think, because if you do TV, you don't see who's watching you. It might get reported, but that's really beautiful, I think. So that's lovely. I've got some tough questions. Did you know I sent them to you? So they're coming up. So if they're like, oh my gosh, don't make me answer for the whole acting community, then fair enough. But as I said to you, I am interested in your job, Tash, and your life, because I think there's that sort of dream job quality about it. And I, as I'm sure you do workshops with young people sometimes, and I feel very tenderly towards them. And it feels like there's a bit of dance between please follow your dream, but please take care, because it's also really blooming heartbreaking. And I just wondered, as a professional actress who's done so brilliantly, what would you say to someone, not even necessarily a young person actually, but anyone who has hopes of being an actor? Would you encourage them to pursue their dreams?
100%, because pursuing your dreams is what's going to ultimately make you happiest. However, be realistic about what those dreams are, or what you're walking into. I think with the sort of pressures, and as you mentioned, the sort of narrow field that people look at this job through, it can seem like you're failing when you don't meet those expectations or demands that people expect of you. And I think it's more important to realise that it's not easy for everyone. And and it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hard work in the doing of it. It's a lot of hard work in the maintaining of it. It's a lot of hard work enduring it, because that's what it is. It's an endurance race. A friend of mine, a good friend, once said, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And there are some people who are the Usain Bolts of the acting industry and will sprint that 100 meters and they'll do it in 10 seconds and then there they are, they've arrived. And then there are others of us who are doing the 10,000 meter marathon, and we're there and we're still running and we haven't fallen over. And sometimes we might fall over, but the important thing is you get back up. And it might take us longer before we arrive. Some of us might be emerging forever before we're established. That, I think, like I said, it's not a race. It's, you have to learn to value your successes on a different, on different parameters.
I guess it's about defining success for yourself.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, and sometimes that took me a long time to sort of go, actually, I'm doing what I love. So by definition, this is success.
100% that. Like, if there are people that are willing to read your work or watch you perform or pay money to see you, then you are successful. Like, it doesn't matter, you know, the accolades are great. Everybody wants an accolade. Of course, we all want to be rewarded. But if you're happy doing what you're doing and the other people are happy to support you doing what you're doing in whatever guise that comes in, then you are very successful, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. My other question is sort of connected to that, actually, to that journey and that endurance, as you so beautifully described it. As you and I both know, it's a tough gig. And I just wondered what you personally use in your Tash toolbox in terms of sort of keeping resilience and hope for yourself, or where you find strength. Because I just thought it'd be really nice to hear from you, because it might be useful for other people who are like, oh my, you know, it's terrible at the moment. Yeah, I just wondered if you have things that you'll go to. This is going to make me feel better. This is going to give me back hope. This is going to help my resilience as a professional actor.
Okay, well, I'm going to start by being honest. There was a point where I was just like, nah, this is just not working. This is awful. And that was maybe 10 years ago. And I would like have one audition a year and then I'd get one job a year. So I was always 100% successful in my audition.
That's pretty good, isn't it? 100% success rate. Come on.
But when you only get one, of course you're going to have a 100% success rate, because you spend a lot of time working on that one. And then I changed agents and joined a cooperative, which is not a sort of mainstream agency. It's an agency run by actors. And the first thing that I was struck by being in this co-op, and they work for some people and they don't work for others. So I'm not suggesting that this is like the route you have to take. Is that it gave me so much perspective, because up until that moment, I didn't really know many other actors apart from actors in my year. And that in its own right can be quite difficult if they're all doing well and you're not. And so suddenly I was in this agency with 30 other actors of varying demographics and varying ages and heights and sexes and all the things that I wasn't. And being part of this agency means that you're also their agent and they're your agent. So one of the first things I learned was how other people viewed me.
Yeah.
And therefore I learned what my USP, my unique selling point was. Because once you start having to market someone else, you learn how to market yourself. And you learn what your strong suits are. The second thing was we'd have this board on the wall to mark down people's availability, so people who were working. And if you were working, it was in red. And if you had other things that were limiting your availability, they'd be in other colours. And out of 30 people, there was maybe like less than half were in red. And then you suddenly started realising, actually, there are a lot more people who aren't working that are working. There are people who come for auditions, or you're seeing the things that are coming in for auditions, you're going, there aren't that many jobs for people who look like this that are coming in, or who are this age, or etc. And then you suddenly realise, actually, it's not just you that's working hard. There's a whole bunch of people around you working hard. And perspective is so important because, I mean, in recent years, things have changed, but we never really talked about, like, the elements of being a jobbing actor, and the actors are sometimes in front of a camera or on stage, but sometimes they're also working in Sainsbury's, or they're working in a call centre, and that, you know, the job is not linear. And learning that actually gave me a lot more hope, I guess, because I was like, I'm not alone, and there are all these people working for me, and I'm working for them to try and make this work and this happen.
There's a lot of comfort, isn't there? In it's a sort of, I guess you could say, a bit of a bleak comfort, but there's a lot of comfort in knowing you're not the only one that's suffering. Yeah. You're not on your own. It's not unique. It's a kind of tough comfort, but it is a comfort nonetheless. So I can see that was amazingly empowering, actually.
Yeah, but also having people supporting you and going, yes, it's hard right now, but it won't always be hard. Like, if you are, like, previously when I said I was, like, sort of in isolation, which I wasn't, but, like, it wasn't the same kind of thing, the only support is coming from your own, like, well of resilience, as opposed to all of these people behind you going, no, it's going to be okay, you'll get the next one. And, like, we had this thing in the agency, when someone got a job, it would go through the email system, and everyone would get an email saying such and such has got a job, and then you just get this wave of, like, emails coming back going, well done, congratulations.
Aww.
It's also really buoyant, because it feels like you know, you've already achieved before you've started the job, and it didn't matter what the job was, it didn't matter what size the job was. And I think that's partly what led me down this whole, like, I have to define success for myself, because these people are all going, well done, and I'm like, yeah, I've got 2 days on a film set, yeah, well done, yay.
That's so nice, this sort of community support aspect. It's brilliant, really, really good. And whilst you, because that's really interesting, Tash. So you had this beautiful experience and opportunity to, as you say, continue with your career, and alongside that, be an agent. You're basically seeing that experience. And during that, did you observe, and you might not have done, I don't want to sort of put words into your mouth, did it look like, in general, the industry was a preserve of a narrow range of people? Did it feel like, okay, I don't know, let's say if you're a tall man that looks like Hugh Grant, you're more likely to get, I'm sorry to pick on Hugh Grant, he seems like a very nice man, but, you know, was it like, actually, if you're this, you're going to get loads of work? Did it feel like that there was a narrow range of opportunity? And also, has it changed?
Yes and no, in that, and it was changing as I was in the agency. I guess when I first started, it was clearly evident that men had more opportunity as a whole, and no matter what age they were, generally men had more opportunity than women, and there are always more women in this industry, as people have pointed out, and in terms of things like casting, in terms of I guess race, was, it took a lot of thought for people to go outside of the obvious choices. And even within the co-op, there were conversations that we would have where we're like, this breakdown came in saying they're looking for an actor to play a doctor in, let's say, an episode of Holby, for example, and it says ethnicity any, but within the agency, none of the non-white actors had been put forward for it. And people going, oh, I didn't realise. And the subconscious bias that exists within an agency, as well as within the casting room as well. It's a casting director can only really cast what they're offered. And if an agency is not offering it, then they don't note that they have another option necessarily.
Yeah.
And I did a job a few years ago called Redefining Juliet, which was a project set up by an actor called Storm Toulis, who has cerebral palsy, and she has always wanted to be Juliet. And so she set up this project so she could be Juliet, but then she also thought about who else doesn't get to play Juliet. And so she put this breakdown out asking for all the kind of others, really tall women who don't get to play Juliet, because a lot of actors are not, that tall. And if you've got a 6 foot woman, for some reason, a 6 foot woman cannot be paired with a 5'10" man.
Well, also, even if he's the same height, I think probably tall women aren't thought of as romantic.
Exactly. And then, we had an actor who had dwarfism. Then I represented the fat girls, and we had an actor in a wheelchair, 2 actors in a wheelchair, and we had this like gamut. At one point, we had an actress who had an actor with full body alopecia, representing all the different types of women that exist that equally deserve to have love stories told about them. But in the breakdown, they asked all of these differences, and they specifically, I remember asking for fat, and I was speaking to the director, and she said a lot of agents had put forward their size 12s or their size 14s, and she was like, no, I want an actual fat woman. I don't want a size 10 or a 12. I don't want industry fat. I want real fat.
Yeah, and like, let's not shy away from those words.
Yeah.
Like fat or old, or,
all of those things. And so, like, it's interesting that it's interesting even for myself that I say industry fat, because I know that's a thing.
Do you know, I think anyone listening as well, everybody knows that sort of means, that probably kind of means size 10 or 12, doesn't it? It's not.
Yeah.
We don't very often see people that are a size 20 or, or 6'4" women, etc. Sounds amazing. That project sounds amazing. I'll look that up as well, and I'll make sure that there's a link to that in there. And so does it feel to you, Tash, during your time working, that things have begun to shift? I'm interested in, I guess, not only the actors that get opportunities, but the stories that are actually told, because it feels to me like that's shifting a bit. So I mean, like, the people that are telling the stories, who gets to tell the stories, who's facilitating them, all of that. Does that feel like that ecosystem of storytelling's broadening a little bit to you?
I think so. I think there's a lot of hope in the work that has happened so far. I think we've still got a long way to go to balance that, but I'm very much buoyed by things like the era 50-50 movement, which was established to get more women on stages, or at least have stages where it's representative of 50% women, 50% men, and everything that lies in between. I'm buoyed about the conversations that we're having about racial diversity and what that means, and the difference between colourblind casting and colour conscious casting. I'm buoyed by the conversations that we're having about age, particularly when it lies to women, and that we need to see more older women on stages and on screen, because people don't die when they turn 40. That's not a thing anymore.
No.
And women don't die at 40. And as we already know, women live longer than men statistically. So why are our scenes and stages bereft of them?
I know, I was saying to my friend the other day, I saw I can't remember what it was, Tash, I wish I could remember, but I saw a woman playing the wife of a man who was in his 50s, and she was in her 50s, and I realised it looked odd to me. Because he would usually have a wife in his 20s, not in real life, like we know that's normal in real life, like, but on screen I was like, oh, and again it refreshed my eyes. I was like, oh, do you know what I mean? It kind of catches you because it's different.
Like the reaction to when Keanu Reeves went to, I can't remember which red carpet event that he went to, and he went with his girlfriend who was in her 40s, and everyone was like, oh, but she's old. I'm like, no, she's age appropriate.
I know. It's not even worth a comment, is it?
Yeah, it's a non-story. The story is Keanu Reeves has a girlfriend and it's not me. That's the story. story that she is a woman who is, you know, appropriate for his age. And I'm not suggesting that, you know, there shouldn't be age gaps in relationships, of course. But what I'm suggesting is that we've set up the system, at least in Hollywood for definite, where there is this enormous age gap that doesn't necessarily exist in reality. And so then we see it like you saw it, we're like, oh, that's weird. And we don't do the reverse often. We don't do the older woman with the much younger man.
Well, unless it's the story is that.
That, exactly.
So it sounds like, I'm glad to hear you say that. It sounds like there is lots of hope in terms of like investigating colour conscious casting, you know, all of that stuff, investigating
conversations about ableism and how that affects our arts as well, I think is also really important.
Ableism, yeah, and the 50-50 stuff. So there's stuff, I mean, you know, I'm not naive about this. I know there's a lot more work to be done, but for me, you know, I'm in my 50s. I feel like there wasn't even this conversation. It wasn't even a conversation. You just kind of had to stay quiet about things. So I do find hope there, and I'm really grateful for everyone that's sort of fighting towards that as well. This is a little bit more sort of specifically about theatre, Tash, for a moment. I'm sort of aware, as we all, I know, poor theatre, I'm aware with, I'm trying to sort of go, look, theatre's had a massive bashing, not just theatre, but you and I work in theatre a lot and we both love it. So like, just focusing on that, theatre is one of the industries that's had a massive kicking since COVID. And I'm trying to sort of stay looking at it clearly without plunging into a well of despair.
Yes.
And I wondered, and honestly, being as honest as you like, how are you feeling about that? Do you feel like there is any good, and I'm still asking myself this, whether there might be any good or anything positive could come out of the huge changes that are taking place moving forward? And what do you think we need to do as a theatre industry in order to be able to survive? And you might not have any answers because we're in it, aren't we? And it's scary.
That is a good question. I have to stop myself catastrophizing almost every day.
Yeah, right. Me too.
And I guess, I mean, one of the things, theatre, it is really sad. And let's be honest about that. Because obviously yesterday we had the news about the Royal Exchange potentially having to make 65% of their workforce redundant. And then Nuffield Theatre closing. Newcastle Theatre Royal, I think, is going through the things. The Globe has had to reach out. And there will be more. Unless our government steps up to help this industry. And this industry is also very much tied to tourism and hospitality. The three go hand in hand. So I personally don't understand how you can help pubs and help tourism without helping theatre. Because what is the point of tourism if there's nothing for them to see? One of the things that people do is go to theatres when they go, you know, on holiday. Even if that is a staycation. I'm aware of theatres around the country and they need our help as much as London needs the help.
Yeah.
And it's saddening to see areas lose their community space as well, because that's also what a lot of theatres offer, is a community space as well as a performance space, which I think people are also forgetting. But will remember when their local theatre cafe doesn't open because the theatre's closed. But I think one of the things that has kept me going is the activism that has come up as a result of trying to save the industry. Even if that is just petitions or writing to MPs. Tracy Brabin, I'm getting her name right.
Yeah.
It's been doing wonderful work in shouting for us. And, you know, I emailed Vicky Foxcroft, who's my local MP, easy for me to say, and she was very responsive to the concerns that I have. So if you live in Lewisham Borough, guys, where there is a massive arts community in Lewisham, write to Vicky if she's your MP, or write to any of the other Lewisham MPs. They will respond. But also, the freelance task force that's been set up, which is representative of 138 theatres and companies, I believe, is also something to hold on to, because that task force has been set up by the people who work within the industry. And so we'll know all of our individual concerns and are speaking on our behalves. Not just the people who work above us, but the people who are our peers are speaking on our behalves of varying different career trajectories, disciplines, and all the rest of it. And I think working together and collaborating is the only way that we can potentially get through this. And I think it also means that there's hope for a different normal. That the normal that existed before might be usurped by a normal that's more inclusive of us all.
Yeah.
And that does mean that, yes, we'll have to share the load, which means some of us may work less than we're used to. But that means someone else could work a little bit more. And I'm aware that my successes allow doors to open for me that didn't open to me 5 or 6 or 10 years ago. But I'm willing to give up that space so a younger actor can come behind me, because I think it's scariest for them. You imagine you've just done the 3 years and you just graduated last year, and this is what you're walking into.
Yeah. No, I agree. This extraordinary time, which in a funny sort of way feels like it started back in 2016.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It feels, one really encouraging thing is that it has made activists of all of us, and it's made tighter communities and mutual aid and that kind of thing come right into the headline. And actually, without being Pollyanna-ish, those are incredibly hopeful things, I think. You know, the things you're describing, and being ready, and actually learning to live with uncertainty, acknowledging that actually uncertainty could be great. It could mean that the future's better. It doesn't have to mean it's sort of apocalypse. Is really hopeful. So I think all of those things are great. I'm sort of looking at our time, Tash, and thinking we should have just done a whole series of podcasts with you. So you've had some great answers, but
no, I get boring real quick.
No, you don't. I just wanted to pull away a little bit from theatre and just look at the sort of bigger picture of what's going on at the moment. And obviously, recently, the tragic death of George Floyd on May the 25th, and again we saw this massive upburst of solidarity to black communities, protests blossoming worldwide. Again, this other thing that was about, which I found encouraging, which was like, there were people that became activists by definition who perhaps hadn't felt confident enough or had to do so before. And it feels like it has the possibility to be genuinely transformative to me. And I kind of wondered what you thought about that. I feel like hearing I was listening to our footballers talk. I've been speaking to American friends who've been involved in the protests, and hearing people say, like, this time it might actually not be empty words, but it might be real change because statues are taken down. The way that history's being told is being retold. How does that, does that make you feel hopeful, honestly, Tash? Or do you think, it's just more of the same, blather, blather, and then it'll all go back? Or
it's been an interesting time, because I would say it started for us in 2011, but the Black Lives Matter movement didn't exist then. It wasn't an articulate thing, and obviously I'm referring to the London Riots, for those of you who don't know, because it had a similar instigator.
It was the death of Mark Duggan,
yeah, and it was very much a youthful reaction to it, but it wasn't organised in the way that Black Lives Matter was. So it just came across like a sort of flash in the pan.
It was a roar, wasn't it? It was a roar of anguish. And I think I always remember that Martin Luther King quote, which I'm probably going to horribly misquote him, but he said, "Riots are the language of the unheard."
Yeah.
And I remember when the 2011 riots happened, which are still to date the most impactful thing I've ever witnessed. I remembered him saying that because I didn't like I was like, no, people aren't just kicking things in. Yeah. They're just trying to express this massive pent-up rage.
Yeah, this anger comes from somewhere. It just doesn't, like, it's very rare for anger to be that spontaneous. And at the time, I remember thinking when I was 15, 16, no one was listening to me. No one that had the powers that be weren't listening to me. And I, as a woman in my 20s, I'm still not being listened to because I don't have a mortgage and I don't have children. Therefore, when politicians are worrying about the next election, I'm not the target audience. And I feel like that has changed significantly, that people are realising that the young people have an interest in how their country is run. I also think specific to the Black Lives Matter movement, not moment, movement. I think something has changed. Like when I was 6, and I'm going back anecdotally, my mum took me to a church hall in Harlesden to listen to the Reverend Jesse Jackson speak. I didn't know who the Reverend Jesse Jackson was. I thought he was a member of the Jackson family. I expected some dancing, I expected a moonwalk, I wanted Michael to turn up, I wanted Janet to be there. And then I realised that that's not where I was going. I was 6. I'm just going to lay that on the line again. 6 years old. And but I was in a room, and I can't remember what it was that he was speaking about. I'm assuming it was to do with apartheid in South Africa, because that was still a thing. But I don't know, I can't remember, so please don't quote me. But I remember being in a room with lots of Black adults crying and singing "We Shall Overcome," and not understanding what that was, crying or angry or all the emotions in that ring. And I am now 30-something, and I'm still surrounded by Black adults wanting to be heard. Adults that are older than me, adults that are younger than me, children screaming to be heard. And I feel like this time there is a listening happening on some level. I also feel really proud of the friends that I've made, who aren't Black or brown, who are white, and who have stood up and said, actually, this isn't okay. Because I've made good friends. I've made the right choices about the people I have in my life. And for those of you who haven't realised, I am Black.
Well, it is audio, so
yeah. And I think there has been a positive change in recent years. And I hate to say it, like even with the Brexit referendum and the election of Trump, although they haven't gone the way those of us who are more progressive have wanted, the numbers of 48% or 47%, I think it was in America, they're very close numbers to ours. That's really high, because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, it wouldn't have been 48-52. It would have been closer to 70-30, and even smaller numbers the further we go back into the 20th century. If I think about when my mum was born in like 1955, if we'd had that kind of vote then, the numbers wouldn't have been as high. Even in the 80s, the numbers wouldn't have been as high in regards to the more progressive side of society. And so I think that is something to look forward to. And I went to the protests in London, and they were peaceful, and it's really interesting. I saw this woman on Twitter, American woman, African American woman, who was talking about Black Lives Matter and the looting that hasn't necessarily been done by Black people, but has been used as a way to discredit the movement. And she was angry, and she was rightfully angry. And I think that's something that people have to realise. There is an anger there. The anger comes from frustration, not hate, but frustration that even though our parents have said it and our grandparents have said it, that we're still having to say it, and our children are having to say it. And I think we would all love for our grandchildren not to have to say it. It's how long do we have to keep shouting to be heard? And it's not just us, because, it's not just Black people. It is Asian people. It is Latino people. It is all the peoples that aren't not allowed, but whose voices often get dismissed, or whose voices often get drowned. And the Black Lives Matter movement isn't just about being black; it's about equality for all. And this woman was in her delivery was very angry, and the last thing she said was, "You're lucky that black people aren't looking for revenge, and they're looking for equality."
Yep.
And that's not because I'm suggesting that, we need to topple. I mean, we need to topple the system that makes it unfair. That much is true. But that system also makes it unfair for women. That system also makes it unfair for disabled people. That system makes it unfair for anyone who isn't whatever the default is.
Which is so narrow, which sort of circles back when we were talking about the stories that get told.
Yeah.
This is why I hope it didn't feel crude to you, that sort of question going on from talking about theatre, but for me they are connected, because I was thinking about how some of it is about stories actually. Like, the Bristol statue?
Yeah.
Tash, for me, I was like, I've never heard of that man. Now I've heard his story. So that statue didn't represent history. It just represented itself.
Yeah.
But in a really negative way for a lot of people who it hurt.
Yeah.
There's no argument for keeping them up because they don't tell a story anyway.
Not if you're not telling the whole story.
No, or even part of it.
If you're picking and choosing which parts of the story that you want to tell. Obviously, if I'm telling you a story about myself, I'm going to tell you the best things about myself.
Yeah.
I'm going to paint the story where I'm the protagonist and I am a wonderful protagonist.
Sure.
But there will always be someone who goes, hold on, Natasha Magigi, I've experienced her in this, guise. There's always someone who's always experienced a side of you that isn't your best side, but for whatever reason. And you don't want those stories to come out. Nobody wants someone to turn out in the background and go, oh, well, actually, I knew when that person was such and such and did such and such and ruined such and such for me. But if that happens, you have to turn around and go, actually, yeah, I did do that. I'm not proud of that. And that was unfair of me. And I'm sorry. Not, I'm sorry you felt that way.
No, that's so passive-aggressive, isn't it?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And the thing that I find difficult is I don't understand why some people have learned that people will forgive you if you just say I'm sorry and own up to the thing that you did.
Yeah.
As opposed to lying and pretending it didn't happen, and therefore, raising people's ire. It's so much faster to go, I'm really sorry, I broke your Ming vase, I didn't mean to, it was an accident. As opposed to, I didn't break that, I have no idea what happened, I know I was the only person who could possibly have done it, it wasn't me.
It's braver and stronger, isn't it, as well? And you can't avoid anger either way, and nor should you try to. After the Grenfell fire, that we were both in London when that happened, I was outside Kensington Town Hall, and there was a council worker, and I always remember what she said. It sort of relates to what you've just said. And all the other council workers had put their jackets over their head and they'd escaped out the back to avoid the angry crowd, the rightfully angry crowd. She, who was just like a lowly council worker, I said, are you going out there? And she said, yeah. She said, Bernadette, sometimes you have to stand on the steps and let people shout at you. And I just thought that was the most amazing thing to say.
But every customer service assistant knows this. The easiest way to deal with an angry customer is to let them get whatever frustration it is that they have out, and then you deal with the situation. Because ultimately, that's what we're experiencing right now, and there are people going, this isn't okay. We have to look at the way that we have set up the world, where there are those who, irrespective of how hard they work, cannot achieve. And that doesn't mean it's your fault specifically, Bernadette, as a white woman.
Yeah.
Not my fault specifically as a cis heterosexual woman. But to pretend that I don't have privileges that trans people don't, or to pretend I don't have privileges that gay people don't, would be a lie. Of course, but the issue with the Black Lives Matter movement is this is visible in the same way that disability is visible. I can't hide what I look like. And therefore, it's really important what stories we are telling if the stories that we're always telling are these people are suspicious.
Yeah.
And these people can't be trusted. Instead of being like, actually, that's universal. There are all types of people who have all different shades of skin. And we're not all the same. And we haven't all gone through the same experiences. But to discredit someone's truth is unfair. I have never been stopped and searched, but I've never been stopped and searched because I'm a woman.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean all black women haven't been stopped and searched. That's not true. That's just my experience of that. I'm not a Muslim woman, but I know what it's like when I put a head wrap on, which is part of my cultural heritage as well, and people have misunderstood what that is and therefore made assumptions about me based on what I'm wearing on my head, and I think we have to be more open to listening and being more open to criticism. And I think that those people who are fighting against this movement and all the movements, be they about race, be they about gender, are people who are afraid partly of change, but also people who are afraid of criticism.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be told that it's their fault. It's not their fault, but you've benefited from a system that has made it easier for you, even if you're on the bottom end of that system. Because the difference between you on the bottom end of that system and someone else is already massively greater.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like, because, I mean, obviously I'm affected by the bubble. We're all in a bubble of some kind or another, but I feel like these conversations are happening much more on the front foot, much more publicly than I've known them to happen before, which is where I feel a little bit more hopeful about the possibility of progressive change. Things like saying, let's educate ourselves, let's think about our privileges, let's find out what we didn't know or what we learned the wrong way, let's amplify other people's voices, feels more like more of a common conversation. Do you think so?
Yeah, but I also think we shouldn't lambast each other too much either, because part of the job is listening. Listening happens both ways.
Yeah.
But you have to let the voices be heard. I had a wonderful WhatsApp message that came to me from my sister, who's much more active and vocal than I am in different ways. And she's a teacher, and she sent me this message that had been an open letter that had been written from an alumni from my secondary school. And I learnt a lot in secondary school, but I learnt because of certain teachers and also because I had an interest in history. So, I spent my whole time being like, oh, well, there have been black people in the UK since the first AD. So I didn't understand the problem. What's this about? But that's because I was interested in that. We also learnt about the Irish Troubles as part of our studies. So I have a knowledge of Irish history to a greater or lesser degree. That I know other people are like, well, where did you learn that? How did you learn that? And I'm like, well, I learned that in school. But this letter, either way, still came asking for the curriculum to be opened up to include more stories and more histories of other people and less decolonised histories. That was started by an alumni. And I was looking, there was a list, you could write your name, you could sign the letter. And there were lists of people from my year group. There were lists of people from 1970 on that list, because you had to put which year you graduated and all the rest of it. And that was really hopeful. And obviously then I forwarded it to my school friends, and I'm like, well, this just came to me, so sign it, because I think that's probably a good thing, and that's something that's localized and specific to my experience.
Yeah. Those are really important, knowing those things, though. Like the big world stage stuff's important, but the really local, about your life stuff's important as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that always feels to me like, oh, I can do something here because I'm here.
Yes.
Or, you know, I don't, sometimes it's a bit overwhelming to think, oh my gosh, how am I going to dismantle systemic sexism or systemic racism? But right here you can do something, which I think is brilliant. Oh, thank you, Helen. I've just got one last question because we're nearly out of time, and this is I'm asking you really mind-blowing questions, aren't I? But I just wondered if, as an artist, Tash, I'm sort of interested again, it circles back a little bit to how I think art's a little bit under siege at the moment in general. But I wondered if you thought that if art, in general terms, is one of the tools that can provide hope to people, and also if you thought that art could usefully be one of the tools to help positive social change.
100%. But I think you expected that answer from me.
I don't know. Do you know what? People have really surprised me.
I 100% think it does. I've recently been doing some like Zoom theatre, and we've done the entire Shakespeare canon, all 38 plays, and
crikey, that's a lot. Who's that with, Tash?
Shakespeare Happy Hours. So we finished last Friday with two gents of Verona, and it's interesting. One of the questions that would always be asked, because we do a little kind of Q&A, or as Americans call them, talkbacks, after each show, inverted commas, and one of the questions that would be asked would be, how is this show relevant or not relevant today? And we would always find relevancy in almost every single one of them. And if there is relevancy in plays that were written 500 years ago, or 400 and some years ago, there has to also be relevancy in the things that we write today, and the things that we perform today. And I think, and I said this when we did Taming of the Shrew, which caused massive discussion for obvious reasons, I said that I think our jobs as artists, actors, performers, writers, directors, musicians, the whole gamut of the creative industries, is one, to entertain. Of course, we need entertainment and we need escapism, because sometimes reality is just hard, and sometimes that entertainment and escapism is what gives you hope to carry on in that reality. But two, our job is also to educate, and that means telling the stories that people don't know, because how will you know them if you've never been told them? And it's not your fault that you don't know, it's our fault for not teaching you. And that doesn't mean that the burden should lie on those who've suffered the most to teach you. However, education is important, and I think the arts allows that in a framework that is easy to access, and hopefully in a way that isn't preachy, because obviously people don't like being preached at, and also isn't one that is just preaching to the choir, because the choir already knows the hymn. It's the people who aren't members of the choir that also need to hear it. But also, I think our job is also to reflect back society and ourselves, which means we also then have to have the difficult conversations. Because I was told by a director, I was doing a tour of Shakespeare's shows last year, that everything you say, even in Shakespeare, whatever you're doing, there's someone in the audience that needs to hear what you're saying, either because they're the perpetrator or they're the victim. And sometimes when you shine a light on someone's behaviour that isn't acceptable, and they see how everyone else reacts to that behaviour, it gives them an opportunity to reflect upon themselves. Or if you're the victim, it gives you the opportunity to see that the situation that you're in is not necessarily the healthiest for you, and maybe that first step that helps you get yourself out of that situation. And I think what we do as a living is allow those conversations to happen, and sometimes you have to force those conversations to happen, because otherwise they just won't happen. And I'm going to go back to my book that my cousin wrote.
Yeah, good.
Because the central character in there is a girl called Nancio, and she is a child growing up in London with Zimbabwean heritage, and she plays the violin, the piano and the recorder. that character didn't exist for me when I was 8 years old, playing the violin, the recorder, and the piano, but it exists now. And means there are other children who'll be able to experience that. And also, there are other children who don't have that heritage who will be able to experience someone else's cultural heritage.
Yeah.
Which is incredibly important. And I think and even though the world at the moment is closed, I think it's important that we reach out to other cultures and other communities, because that's what it will help us in terms of our growth. Like, I was lucky last year, I went on a world tour and I was familiar with a lot of the places that we'd gone to, but then I also went to Asia, and I'd never been to East Asia or any part of Asia. I'd never been to any Asian place. And we went to Singapore, we went to China, to Beijing in China, we went to Hong Kong during the protests, and then I went to Japan for, shits and giggles. But like, experiencing that difference was really important, because it changes the way I look at things. It changes the way I appreciate certain things that I didn't have an understanding of. It also makes the world so much smaller, and you realise how much human you are. It increases your humanity when you realise the similarities as well as the differences between you, because both are important. We're not the same, but we're not all that different.
Yeah.
But the differences and the similarities should both be celebrated, because...
Yeah, and I think what you said about using art to be able to access that's really important in the moment, because we can't travel around so much.
Yeah.
So actually being able to have your cousin's book, podcasts, shows on Zoom, etc., is a way of experiencing that as well, which is really important.
Absolutely, and world cinema is important. And like, I saw kabuki theatre when I was in Japan, and oh my God, it blew my mind.
Yeah.
Like, it's so different from anything we have, but yet at the same time I was like, oh, but that's kind of like panto. There are things that we as humans all share. We have very similar mythologies running through all of our cultures. And so why there is this difference between us doesn't make any sense. I mean, it does if you think about money and power, but like, the ultimate core of who we are as people is similar. We love our families. We love each other. We just need to love all of each other.
Yeah.
That's a bit wet, isn't it?
I hope you enjoyed listening to the very inspiring Natasha Magigi. Actually, Natasha and I are in a show together, I'm very proud to say, called The House That Slipped, which is with Teatro, Vivo, Lewisham, South East London based theatre company. It's an online immersive show called The House That Slipped. It's online, but also in an outdoor secret location, and it starts on the 3rd of August 2020 and ends on the 8th of August 2020. And you can find tickets, if you'd like to see Natasha in that, at teatrovivo.co.uk, which is teatrovivo.co.uk. I hope you enjoy, and I will catch up with you next week. Bye.